Hello, everyone. I'm your narrator from Grave Hush, and I'm here to help you unwind tonight. I know many of you use these stories to fall asleep. So before we begin, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where in the world are you listening from? And what time is it for you right now? Now get cozy, take a deep breath, let your body sink into the stillness. It's time to relax and let the story carry you into sleep. Our first story tonight. Let's begin. How planning a wedding almost ended my life. I'm a wedding planner and I am good at my job. If a client wants something, I go above and beyond. I get them what they want, especially big clients. And Miss Laura was a big client. Her family had wealth that went back to the first colonies, and it didn't look like they'd lost any in the intervening 400 years. I remember touching up my lipstick in the vanity mirror above the driver's seat and thinking to myself that this was it. I was on the cusp of 40, and I was about to break into the event planning upper echelon of 1%er weddings. It would be Miss Laura's wedding, but it would be my coronation. Sweet little Laura ushered me into her home and we spoke at length. Her expectations were very reasonable and she knew what she was talking about. A life of debutante balls and campaign fundraisers and 500-person Christmas parties was the curriculum she'd learned from. There was only one thing that Laura wanted that no other wedding planner said they could get. I want the woman who lives in the House of Pounds. I furrowed my brow. Maybe Laura wasn't as reasonable as I thought she was. Why? The crone? Why on earth do you want her there? Because she's my great aunt on my father's side, Laura said. That was news to me. I didn't know anyone who'd even met the infamous crone from the House of Pounds, and here was Laura claiming the old witch was family. May I ask why you or your father don't invite her yourselves? She pushed down on the hem of her skirt at her knees and her smile faltered. You know why they call it the House of Pounds, don't you? Of course I knew. Everybody in town knew. But I lied. I don't pay attention to that sort of thing. But you know, Laura added more bite to her voice. I'll bet you even know the words. I involuntarily scanned for escape routes. What words? Say them, Laura said. Say the words or I will find someone else to plan my wedding. Women from inherited wealth have the luxury of following through with threats. Laura had been kind and gracious to me, but she also expected me to dance to her tune. So I said the words. Welcome to the House of Pounds, where all are given just one round. First penalty's a pound of flesh, but try again, she'll take the rest. Do you know what it means? She said. This was like pulling teeth. I did not want to have this conversation, but I answered. I have an idea. Laura looked behind me, behind herself, and all around the room. I was a well-socialized woman. I knew she was about to tell me a secret. I was half right. She didn't tell me the secret, but she showed it to me. She hiked her skirt up all the way to her waist so I could see her panties, whole thighs, and buttocks. Laura's flesh was missing, a pound's worth if I had to guess. From the inside of her thigh, below but very close to the inguinal region. I shuddered. Laura's face reddened. She pulled her skirt back down before looking away. I thought I saw the glimmer of a tear welling in one of her eyes. She wiped her face. You see, I can't go back. I've given my pound of flesh. If I go again, she'll take the rest, I said. Laura nodded. Exactly. I have to tell you, I didn't see what the big deal was once I parked in the driveway and saw it up close. The House of Pounds was nothing more than a shabby example of Gothic revival architecture, an old money homestead that had faded along with the blue in the family's blood. If I had to guess, I'd say she was probably a hoarder and a cat lady. I highly doubted she deserved her reputation as an evilly mystical witch. I walked up and knocked on the door. It opened before I could knock twice. A little girl who couldn't have been older than 6 stood there in a traditional Victorian maid's outfit. "Please come in," she said. "She is expecting you." The grade school chambermaid indicated for me to walk down the main hallway. She used her thumb to point the way because the hand she pointed with had its 4 other fingers missing. This was the creepiest way I'd ever been welcomed into someone's home. But in for a penny, in for a pound. I laughed a laugh specific to my humming nerves and punny thoughts. I walked down the hallway until I saw another grade school chambermaid. She stood next to an open door through which I saw a room shadowed pitch black. This little girl was missing both of her hands. Have you ever seen a child missing a body part, let alone several? It's not just upsetting. It cores you like an apple. The closest I'd ever felt to that coring was after waking from a recurrent nightmare about my mother being torn apart by Rottweilers and thinking she might really have been mauled. My bowels felt stuffed full of lead shot and detached from my intestines. "Hello," I said, eyeing the girl's missing hands. "Are you okay?" she whispered like she was afraid someone was listening. "I have a secret to tell you." She waved one of her stumps inward. I leaned close to her and turned my ear toward her lips. I heard a man's voice say, "In for a penny, in for a pound." I turned and saw a 6-foot ghoul dressed in the same Victorian maid outfit as the 2 little girls. I screamed and turned to run, but he wrapped one of his long limbs over me from behind, pinning my arms to my body and my body to his. He covered my mouth and whispered, "Shh, shh, shh. Quiet now, quiet now." I cried into his hand. "You're here to meet her, aren't you?" he said. He removed his hand so I could speak, but I couldn't. I was out of my wits with fear. "Answer me or I'll make a pair of mittens from the flesh I cut out of your belly." I sobbed and hurriedly nodded my head. "Use your words like a big girl," he said. "Yes," I said through my tears, my body shaking almost like I was having a seizure. "Yes, I'm here to meet her." He let go from behind me and I heard him step back and away. I turned to face him, but there was no him there. It was only the grade school chambermaid. "Then by all means," the little girl shoved me into the darkness through the open door behind my back. I went tumbling down a 45-degree angled chute. I heard inhuman voices, what might have been 50 monsters' voices, roaring and screeching at me. They called me terrible names, nonsensical names, cruelly true names. Shit-eater, starfucker, mother of excrement, beef stew. Thin-lipped spinster, drunk driver, and with every insult I felt a sharp, hot, wet pain somewhere in my body, like 10-penny nails being hammered into my stomach, my spine, between my toes and fingers, and the soft flesh between my genitalia and anus. The pain felt like every hurt I'd ever felt, puncturing my flesh again all at once. I screamed and cried as I tumbled down the chute. It spat me out onto a basement's dirt floor. A single hanging light bulb shone over the dusty ground. I put my hands out in front of me and saw blood run in rivulets down my arms. My blood went through my fingers and soaked into the dirt. I hung my head between my biceps. How was I going to escape? She stepped into the light, far enough to silhouette her face but not show it. I wasn't looking at her directly, but through my peripheral vision. I thought if I looked up, I would see the face of 100 monsters, see malformed lips defame and degrade me. "Look at me," she said. I shook my head no, watching my blood dribble. From behind her, I heard the low ticking rumble of a crocodile. Then I heard 2, then 3. Then 100 reptilian groans bellowing at once, threatening to rupture my eardrums. I screamed, "Okay!" The crocodilian bellows stopped. I looked up. I saw a woman in a widow's black mourning dress. It covered her arms up to her wrists and her neck up to her chin. Her face was obscured by a lace black mourning veil. But even through the veil, I could see outlines of missing pieces. A quarter of a lip gone, half of one ear. a dry and angry eyeball glaring through where an eyelid used to be. "Why are you here?" she said. "Why do any of you come when you already know the words?" "I'm here because of a wedding." "Who are you marrying?" she asked. "Not my wedding, someone else's." She laughed low in her throat. "A pound of flesh for someone else's betrothal. It sounds rather like the Merchant of Venice." The Merchant of Venice. The Merchant of Venice, I thought to myself, remembering long-forgotten English classes, stories I hadn't thought of in years. "Bargain!" I screamed it out. I screamed it out again. "Bargain!" I stood up, my pulse pushing blood from my wounds till my clothes were soaked crimson. "I assert my right to bargain. I will surrender my pound of flesh, but only with consideration. I demand a contract for the exchange." I saw the ghost of a wretched smile through her veil. I never thought I would hear it. "If you assert your right to bargain, I am not one to refuse. I presume you offer up your pound of flesh." I found power waiting in my voice. "I offer up a pound of flesh as payment on a bargain." "And what would you bargain for in exchange for your pound of flesh?" "Do you know a woman named Laura?" I asked, adding the family's last name. "I do." "And she is your grandniece?" The crone frowned. "She is." "I offer my pound of flesh in exchange for your promise to attend her upcoming wedding." She was quiet for what seemed like a very long time. She finally said, "Very well. So you accept fair terms and a villain's mind. Come then, we'll draw up the bargain in either blood, ink, or both." Laura's wedding was a spectacular success. The crone attended as she was contractually obligated to attend. It gave Laura great cash, and it made my reputation. Business poured in. I wasn't just planning weddings, I was bargaining for new, impossible things on behalf of wealthy clients. Though what I bartered with now wasn't anything so exotic as a pound of flesh. And I was paid very, very well to do it. And anyway, by the time Laura was married, the stump where my hand used to be had healed mostly. Story 1 ends here. Now, let's begin story 2. My retirement home's property manager is in a secret mutant tribe. My wife and I moved into a fancy place for old people right before the pandemic. It's a 55-plus co-op for people like us willing to pay the HOA fees for an on-premises movie theater, restaurant, golf course, and all kinds of other amenities that cost an arm and a leg. We had almost a year to enjoy our new home before the coronavirus. Both of us were old enough to be at risk, but it was her lungs, not mine, that a respiratory infection collapsed. She died in our new home. I still live here, but economically speaking, our co-op never really recovered from the pandemic. At one point, the trash blocked up every disposal chute in the building because the board didn't have the money to pay maintenance men. The building was in dire straits when the current owner bought it in an all-cash deal. The ink hadn't yet dried on the transfer deed when new management showed up. They turned things around very quickly. I was happy that the hallways didn't smell like garbage anymore. The golf simulator, pool, and sauna in my building all reopened too. But I did not care for the new property manager chance. He had oily, slicked-back hair like guys who chew toothpicks and live off the usury of payday loans. He wore a black wool suit even when it was summer. The diffuse scents of carrion and oiled leather followed him wherever he went. One day he asked me if I could meet him in his office to discuss an opportunity. In my experience, people who offer opportunities are looking for one themselves, and I was too old to pull up someone else's bootstraps for them. But after further reflection, I agreed to meet him. I was a retiree in a failing building and had no plausible excuse not to go. Please sit," Chance said. "Do you mind if I call you Irvin?" "It's my name," I said, sitting across from him. There was a very large vacuum-resealable bag of edible insects sitting on his desk. I'd never seen anyone eat bugs unless it was on television for a prize. He saw me eyeing up the bag. "Do you want to try some?" I said, I try not to eat anything that crawls. Not even crabs?" I frowned. "How can I help you, Chance?" "Right down to business." He dusted the dried insect seasoning off his fingers. It smelled like fish food. "I can respect that. My old man hated chit-chat too." "Must skip a generation," I said. "Anyhow, there are some new changes that the co-op is making, and I wanted to get your input before the next board meeting. I thought that your company buying the co-op meant you don't have to listen to the board." "Yes, that's true," he said, pulling what looked like an electric blanket onto his lap from below his desk. It was already 78 degrees in his office. "But I think it's better for everybody if we make a good faith effort to get on the same page." "Okay, fine. But I'm not on the board. What do you need me for?" "You're a veterinarian." I raised an eyebrow. I hadn't been a veterinarian since the 90s. I'd mentioned my practice exactly 0 times since my wife died. And there was a good reason for that. If a bunch of old biddies think you can fix their Maltese's bowel obstructions, they will chase you to your doorstep till you do it. "So?" I said. Chance opened his laptop and something on screen broadened his smile. "Did you write yearly variations in the ovarian cycle of the lizard Varanus komodoensis?" He turned his laptop screen toward me so I could see. It was a PDF of the article I wrote for the 1975 Journal of Herpetology. I was astonished, and frankly, because all old men are lonely and desperate for someone to praise their past deeds, somewhat flattered. "Where'd you find that?" "Listen, Irvin," Chance said, turning his laptop toward him again. "You're an important part of what we're trying to do here." He started scribbling on a piece of paper. "This is the address we'll be meeting at tonight at 8. I think it'll be worth your time to come." He handed it to me. I was confused. What was happening? Chance's desk phone rang. He picked it up and started talking like I was no longer there. I left his office, having no clue what any of this was about. It was a Chinese restaurant called Wulong Eatery, and it was inside an actual pagoda. Its several floors built into a tower of multiple tiers with overhanging eaves. Close up, I saw the whole building was made of wood. How had I not noticed a place like this? I'd been to this neighborhood 1,000 times. Inside, Wulong was decorated in the chinoiserie that you associate with socialites who ban people without costumes from their costume parties. A woman with the lithe frame and height of a model waited at a hostess stand with a red symbol carved into its wood front. E. I'm not one to notice this sort of thing, but the hostess had a terrible complexion. Flakes came off of her face, neck, arms, fingers, everywhere. There was a single piece of dead skin in the unbroken shape of a whole ear hanging off of one of her earlobes. I was shocked because other than her bad skin, she was good-looking to a nearly extraterrestrial degree. You know the type. People so beautiful it's frightening to speak with them. "Irvin," Chance called to me from just behind a lattice wood screen carved with fancy fretwork. He was wearing his same black wool suit, even though it was hot enough for a late-night swim. I waved and walked over. "Quite a place." "Oh, yes," he said, placing his arm around my shoulder to bring me along with him. "Wulong is an old haunt of ours. So few restaurants cater to our kind." "You mean property managers?" "Ha! You're a rascal, Irvin. Right this way." He walked me into a private room the size of a basketball court. The walls were all shoji screens with paper panes. He slid one of the shoji doors shut once we were inside. Every surface was stone, and the floor sank down in descending rows of bench seating like in theater in the round. It was an amphitheater inside the floor. People with the same alien good looks and eczematous skin as the hostess filled every row. In the middle, at the very bottom, there was a wading pool filled with dark green water. What was a room like this doing inside a restaurant? My instinct was to flee, but I'm far too old and far too well socialized to behave based on instinct. Come, Irvin, come, come. Chance nudged me forward a little harder than I would have liked. A woman with arms as long as my legs pulled me down next to her at the top row of seating. The woman flicked her tongue at me. It was as gray as it was pink and bifurcated as deeply as a barbecue fork. I tried to get up, but Chance gripped my shoulders from behind and bore down with his weight. "What the hell are you doing?" I wasn't screaming yet, but I would be. The others in the amphitheater swayed in circles in their seats, and they chanted. They chanted human syllables through inhuman vocal cords. I didn't know the language, but the words were loud and clear. They kept saying, "Salah satu dari kami, salah satu dari kami, salah satu dari kami." A group trance. "Hold him!" Chance screamed at the fork-tongued woman. She slithered in closer and wrapped palm frond arms around my narrow chest. She licked me as something dropped off of her face. It was a piece of dead skin, the exact size and shape of her lip. It fell on the ground beside us, white and deflated like an empty cocoon. She smiled, and it was grotesque. It looked like she had livid gums with cactus spines trying to push through from underneath where teeth were supposed to be. She leaned closer. She whispered in my ear, "I've been laying my eggs asexually. All the boys die when they hatch. If we mate, then I can have a girl. She will live." "I want him," another fork-tongued creature hissed from below. It could have been either male or female, I don't know. "He's mine," a female screamed from a few tiers further down. A very large male rushed me like a defensive end trying to sack a quarterback. His skin was scaled, his head was the shape of a brick, and his forked tongue was twice as long as the first female's. He pushed her aside. He held me down. His hand swiped across my abdomen. I felt a sharp sting. I saw 5 parallel slash marks seeping red through my button-down shirt. I started screaming. "Chance! Chance!" I couldn't think of who else to scream for. At least he was someone I knew. More of the creatures shook themselves out of their trance. Their bodies gyrated, limbs bashing the stone surfaces, their arms and legs spasming, a bizarre copulatory dance. Their rhythm was as discomposing as physical violence. The male wasn't in control of himself if he ever had been. He slashed me with his claw 2 more times. I saw my blood pouring out of me. "Oh my God, Chance, please, anyone, someone help me." The male licked my face as he mauled me. 3 females tore at my body trying to get me away from him. "No, no, it hurts, please, please." I was being removed from consciousness by blood loss. One of the females pulled me with her gummy, spiny teeth. She didn't free me from the frenzied male, but bit off 2 of my fingers. Blood sprayed. The entranced group seemed to smell my blood. The copper penny scent snapped them out of reverie. "Enough!" The voice was a crocodilian bellow and an aged woman's rasp. My assailants scuttered away. The creatures who'd been bobbing and chanting suddenly sat frozen in their seats. My belly was sore, wet, and warm. There were many deep gashes. The blood from my missing fingers didn't gush as hard as when they'd been bitten off. I looked toward the voice. In the wading pool, the surface clouded over with steam. I saw a body break through, saw a triangular head on an overlong neck between steep sloping shoulders. Chance was next to me now, roughly shoving my 3 attackers away and hissing at them. The 3 cowered before him. Chance was naked, though what he had between his legs was a reptile hemipene and not a human penis. The creature stepped up from the wading pool's mist. When I saw her, I almost felt relief, because though her body had the squat limbs and elongated body of a lizard, she stood up on 2 legs. Her flesh was the peach blonde pink of human flesh, and her silver hair was in fact silver human hair. And she wore a very human thing to wear. A skirted one-piece bathing suit in a floral print pattern, just like any grandma taking an aqua Zumba class at the Y. In my delirium, I almost laughed at the thought that popped into my head. Komodo Grandma. I have brought him to you, Chance said, lifting me from under my armpits like he was picking up a baby. The Aya. I've brought him to you, Ratu Naga. Komodo Grandma sucked through her teeth in disapproval. For all the good it does me. The children have got at him. Do I need a disemboweled convert? Convert? I was weak, barely able to speak, vision swimming, but I was still conscious. She got on her belly and crawled up tier to tier. She slinked in right beside me. None of the others were as reptilian as Komodo Grandma. Was that why they cowered in fear of her? One moment they were like hyperactive kids busting open a supply of paint in a rainbow over clean white walls. The next they were seen but not heard. A black border was closing in around my field of vision. I smelled and tasted the iron of my own blood in the air. I struggled to breathe. Komodo Grandma placed her hand on my chest. The fingers on her hands were each almost exactly the same size as any other. Nails extruded from her fingers in actual claws. "You're dying," she said to me. I could smell rotten meat on her breath. Her voice was all squall and groan. "I'm very sorry about that. The children are excitable, especially because Chance." She looked over at my co-op's property manager with the superior look of a matriarch, told them all about the lizard doctor. She pantomimed conspiracy and spoke to me behind her claw. "I think they thought you were a lizard, in fact, who was also a doctor." "I don't understand." I coughed blood. Komodo Grandma sighed. It sounded like someone emptying water from a slide whistle. "None of us really understand, Irvin. But here's what you need to know for right now. You're dying, and I can save you. But you have to become one of us." Don't speak yet," she said, the huddle of humanoid reptiles crowding in around her like campers listening to ghost stories around a bonfire. "You can say something when it's to save your life." "My wife." I didn't want to, but I cried. Komodo Grandma patted my chest. "Will always be your wife, Irvin. I'm just trying to save her husband, and maybe get something from you in return." Her stubby, thick fingers pinched my wrist and she slide whistle sighed again. "Your pulse is going, Irvin. You have to choose." "What's your name?" I asked. "Tootie," Komodo Grandma said. "That's a nice name. My wife's name was Mary Beth." "Okay, Irvin, that's a nice name. Okay, but you're losing a lot of blood. I can't force you to choose, but I can't save you unless you choose yes. This is what they mean when they say, 'under the gun.'" She caressed my cheek with her lizard's paw. "So what's it going to be, Doc?" I looked at Tootie and saw a wonderful and ugly smile. I looked at Chance, holding his wool suit in his arms like a security blanket. When had he gone and got that? Everything was questions. The world was confusion. Words were escaping. I saw Tootie's tribe watch us with the anticipation of children watching Mom cut the birthday cake. I thought of my wife alone in a hospital bed. I thought of the lockdown and no one at her funeral. I thought of our wedding and the vain arguments of our young marriage, the whole world in front of us and us unable to see it. Because what young couple could? And I wondered what she would say to me now. My wife, Mary Beth, wondered what she'd tell me to do. I wondered. Then I closed my eyes and I made my decision. All hail Komodo Grandpa. Story 2 ends here now. We drift into Story 3. There's noises coming from my basement. I don't have a basement. None of the houses in our area have basements. I know they're common in a lot of places, but the county where I live sits on this enormous granite bedrock. If there's ever an earthquake on one of the nearby fault lines, our city would be mainly unaffected. A big pro of living here. But it also means digging more than a few feet down is nearly impossible. You hit rock real quick. My wife and I bought our house a little over 7 years ago, and we've never had any issues with it. Not so much as a broken water heater, which is lucky because we've never been super well off. Frankly, we're both just bad with money. We met in a casino. Both of us gamble for fun, which I know is a waste of money, but it's what we like. There's something thrilling about the what if. The point is, our house has never had many issues, no creaks, no thunks or hisses. That's probably why both of us woke up immediately in the middle of the night when the whirring noise started. "What is that?" my wife asked from her side of the bed. I listened. "The AC?" I asked. I turned it off before bed. I sat up, listened some more, and finally kneeled on the bedroom floor. I pressed my ear to the carpet. "It sounds like it's coming from beneath us. That doesn't make any sense." After a few more seconds, the whirring noise shut off. "Water pipes," she decided. "Let's not worry about it." We both went back to sleep. Nothing else happened for a few weeks. When it did, we were at the table eating Chinese takeout and watching Mega Millions with our lottery cards in front of us. Obviously, we'd share the prize money if we ever somehow won. We both still liked buying our own, though. Our numbers that night sucked. Not one of the cards matched even the first set of numbers, so we switched the TV on mute in frustration. "Do you ever think we should give this up?" she asked me. "We never win. Why do we keep—" "Shh." "What?" I tapped my ear and she went quiet. She heard it too, the muffle of voices from somewhere close. Like the time before, I eventually found myself crouched on the floor with my ear to the ground. "It almost sounds like—" But I didn't finish my thought. I didn't need to. It almost sounded like people were below us, muted and warbled, but clearly human. But that didn't make sense. We didn't have a basement or even a crawl space. How could there be people? It kept happening. Over the course of the next few weeks, I continued hearing things from beneath the floor. Sometimes garbled voices, sometimes ticking, sometimes pounding like footsteps running up and down a staircase. I hired a building inspector to come check things out. "There's no basement beneath your floor," he assured me after surveying the property. "None of the houses in this area have them. There's a granite bedrock, I know." What am I hearing then? Rats could be. But when I had a pest inspector come in, none of his traps turned anything up. I hired a few more people, but all of them said the same thing. There was nothing under the ground, there were no noises. "Give it up," my wife told me one day. "Houses just have noises sometimes." "Not like this. Don't you hear them too?" She hugged me and rubbed my back. "Let it go." "Okay then," I told myself, "let it go. You'll get used to it. They're just noises." I stopped bringing it up. I stopped sleeping too. At night, laying in my bed, hearing the noises, my mind would spiral. What were they? What was down there? Even the nights when I heard nothing, I couldn't help but imagine the worst. What if it was only quiet because the things beneath the floor were taking their own turn to listen to us? And then one night, after months of this, I got up to get a drink of water and stopped dead in my tracks. Our living room should have only had 2 doorways, the front door and the kitchen door. Tonight, though, in the dim light of the fish tank, there was a third. Several feet away, set into the wall where it hadn't ever been before, was an opening. Through it, a set of stairs traveled past the bottom of the floor and down to... Well, I didn't know. It was too dark to see. Call me stupid or reckless, but my first instinct wasn't to bolt the other way. It wasn't even to turn on the lights. Instead, I drifted forwards toward the new set of stairs, a hand wrapped around my bicep. "Don't!" I whirled. My wife stood there in the dim, her eyes boring into mine. "Please," she whispered, "come back to bed, stay with me." Something in her expression was so intent, so full of knowing that I didn't argue, I didn't say anything. We both went back and fell asleep cradled in each other's warm arms. That was the best sleep I'd had in a long time. She's right. All day that's what I told myself. I couldn't just go down some mysterious staircase. It was reckless, irrational, risky. In the end, it was the risk that made me do it. The next night, when I was sure my wife was asleep, I snuck out of our room and back to the living room. Sure enough, that odd, dark opening was there from the night before with a set of stairs leading downwards. "Sorry," I whispered. I descended. Each step was an eternity. Each breath seemed to reverberate through the stairwell. My logical part of my mind screamed to go back. "Don't do this!" The illogical part felt giddy with the thrill of chance. It was the same thrill I felt in the slots or at a poker table. Sure, I might lose everything, but what if? What if? I could see the bottom of the stairwell. I held my breath, stepped onto the landing, and walked into my living room. "There you are," came my wife's voice. She was framed in our bedroom hallway in a loose nightrobe. "Come back to bed." I didn't move. I didn't say a word. She approached me and slid her hand in mine, and I let her lead me back to our bedroom in a daze. My life went back to normal. Sure, I wondered what had happened. Why had the staircase led me back to my own living room? But in the end, I chalked it up to too little sleep and a restless dream. "The noises haven't come for a while," I mentioned to my wife a few days later. "What noises?" "From the floor, the voices and all that." Her eyebrows scrunched up. "What are you talking about? When were you hearing things? Do we need to get the walls checked for rats?" I gaped. Why was she pretending she didn't know what I was talking about? I let it drop. Then a day or two later, I noticed something else. "Babe, where'd the fish tank go?" I asked. "Fish tank?" "There used to be a fish tank right there filled with your guppies. Right on that shelf where those books are. Please no. The last thing we need is rats and fish. That's the basis for a zoo." Over the next week, I started noticing other things. At work, the accent mark had dropped from my manager's name tag. There was a new house on our street that had never been there. The shade of our wall paint was just slightly lighter than before. I was sure of it. I started to feel a sense of wrongness about everything. Like the house wasn't quite right, or my wife wasn't quite my wife. Imperceptible shifts in the universe I couldn't entirely put into words. Something had happened when I went down the stairs. More and more I was sure of it, and however small the changes were, I wanted them reverted. For the third time, I woke myself in the middle of the night. I hadn't seen the staircase since I'd gone down it the first time, but I knew somehow they would be there purely because I wanted them to be. They were. I'd go back up. That's what I decided, except when I approached them, they only went down. "Don't," I heard my wife saying that first night. "But what if?" I whispered. When I reached the bottom, I was back in my living room. The fish tank was still missing. That was the true moment it began, the spiral. The first time was an accident. But that second time, I knew the risk I was taking, and I still took it. Every time since then I've known. It was small changes at first. Slow. Our car had a few extra 1,000 miles on it, or my bank account was a few dollars lighter. Sometimes it was as slight as the table chairs getting a fraction creakier. But the one constant was that the changes were always for the worse. Soon our house was smaller. There was no guest room and the ceiling leaked. I became unemployed. My job let me go a dozen descents in. And my wife started screaming. I tried not to engage with her frequent criticisms, but she wasn't the person I married. She looked like her, but she turned cruel and hot-tempered. If her gambling was a hobby before, now it was a full-on addiction. Even then I should have stopped. I knew it. I had to accept this was my life now and quit while I was ahead. It wasn't even so bad, really. I could still turn things around, get a new job, buy a new house, help her see a therapist. I knew if I didn't, I might walk into a life one day where my wife and I never met or where she had some terminal disease. But I couldn't. It got worse. So much worse. One day I walked into the house and found another couple sleeping in my bed. It wasn't mine anymore. My wife and I were homeless. I had to break in like a criminal each night to continue my descent. I was in debt. So much debt. Collectors started trailing me and confronting me. Violently, my health declined. I hadn't realized I could be directly affected too, but my hair fell completely out. My heart started fluttering irregularly from years of drugs the real me had never consumed, and I would spend the nights in agony, relapsing. My wife turned from spiteful to malevolent. I did indeed find a life where she was never my wife. She was my crazy ex, then my stalker, then eventually my hunter. I hid in abandoned warehouses and houses to avoid her. Once I was forced to kill her to defend myself. After the next staircase, she was back. The stairs are simply a part of my routine now. Hide during the day, break into my old house at night, go down, see what changed, repeat it all the next day. Tell myself that maybe the next descent will be different. Maybe one day my life will reset. Maybe the stairs are a loop and I'll circle to a life even better than where I started. I'm in too deep. I can't stop now. Even if a part of me knows the cold, hard truth my real wife knew those many descents ago. Something she knew because she wasn't my real wife. Don't, she'd said. She was like me. She found the stairs years ago and took them. Many times, I would guess. Enough to understand what was going on. Unlike me, however, she was able to quit in a way I never will because she accepted the truth. The stairs aren't a circle, they're only a spiral. Story 3 ends here. Now, listen closely to story 4. I got a letter from a long-lost aunt I had never heard of before. The letter arrived on a hot Monday, wedged between overdue bills and discount flyers I'd never use. I nearly threw it out with the rest, but the thick envelope caught my eye, the deep blue ink of my name curling across the paper like ivy. I didn't have an Aunt Evelyn, at least not one I'd ever heard of. Her words were warm, almost too warm for someone I'd never met. She had followed my progress from afar, she said. She knew how hard I was working, how difficult it must be to balance school and living expenses alone. But she had an opportunity for me, one that would ease my burdens. A job offer for the summer, room and board included, working for her at her homeopathic pharmacy in a small countryside town. It should have sounded insane. A distant relative appearing out of nowhere, offering me exactly what I needed at the exact moment I needed it. It felt like it was the kind of thing that belonged in cautionary tales, the sort of too good to be true luck that ended in regret. And yet, I was exhausted. Rent was rising, my savings were vanishing. I had been eating instant noodles for weeks. I held the letter to my chest and stared at the walls of my tiny flat, listening to the hum of my neighbor's TV through the thin plaster. The city had been grinding me down for months. Maybe the countryside would be a break, a breath of fresh air before the weight of the new semester in a couple of months crushed me completely. So I accepted. The train ride was long, the kind that lulls you into a false sense of peace. At first, the city stretched on, gray and endless, but slowly, the world outside my window softened. Concrete gave way to fields, then forests, deep and untamed. I had always felt uneasy in places like this. There was something about the countryside, its vastness, its quiet, that made me feel small, isolated. In the city, noise was constant. People were always there, even if they were strangers. The closer we got to my stop, though, the more I felt a slow, creeping euphoria curling its way up my spine. By the time the train pulled into the station, I was almost lightheaded, and waiting for me on the platform with a small, knowing smile was Aunt Evelyn. I knew it was her before we made introductions, or more accurately, she knew me, staring with an unreadable expression I couldn't decipher. Aunt Evelyn's smile never wavered as she led me away from the train station. Her raven black hair framed a face that seemed to hold both kindness and something I couldn't quite place. An intensity that was unsettling yet magnetic. Her clothing was simple, but the colors were striking, earthy tones that blended seamlessly with the natural world around us. "Welcome," she said, her voice a rich, comforting melody. "I hope the journey wasn't too taxing. I know the train can be long, but there's nothing quite like arriving to fresh air." I nodded, still trying to make sense of everything. "I didn't expect it to be so quiet here," I admitted, my words almost swallowed by the stillness of the countryside. Aunt Evelyn chuckled. "The world has a way of calming down in places like this. Here, everything slows. You'll see, there's a certain rhythm to it." I wanted to ask her more, wanted to press her on how exactly were we related, or how did she know so much about me, but her gentle demeanor made me hesitant. It was as if any discomfort I felt could be brushed away with a simple word from her. The walk to her house was short, but the journey seemed to stretch on. The path was flanked by rows of tall hedges, their edges so neatly trimmed they looked almost unnatural, as though they had been sculpted by someone with far too much time on their hands. There was no one in sight, though. Her house was exactly as I'd imagined. A charming, picturesque two-story house that seemed to belong in an old fairy tale. Whitewashed walls, ivy creeping up the sides, a thatched roof that seemed impossibly perfect. Even the windows, framed with wooden shutters, were so quaint it almost looked like they belonged in another time. Inside, it was no less enchanting. The floors were hardwood, warm and gleaming, stretching out into rooms filled with the scent of dried herbs and a subtle floral fragrance that clung to the air. Shelves lined the walls, stocked with jars and bottles of every shape and size, filled with odd powders and liquids that shimmered with colors that seemed to change as you looked at them. The walls were adorned with tapestries of intricate designs, some depicting scenes of nature, others more abstract, like strange, twisting vines that seemed to move if you stared too long. The pharmacy was attached to the house, yet it felt somewhat separate. The main area where customers came and went was distinct from the living quarters, creating a divide between business and home. Though connected, the two spaces had their own purpose, as if the house and the pharmacy coexisted rather than blended together. The wooden counter stretched long and smooth, the shelves behind it meticulously arranged with bottles and vials. Some bore familiar labels: chamomile, lavender, eucalyptus, while others were written in a script I didn't recognize. The air held a mixture of scents, earthy, floral, sometimes even metallic, and I could tell that this was the true heart of Aunt Evelyn's work. "This is incredible," I murmured, my voice barely above a whisper, as though I feared disturbing the serenity of the space. Aunt Evelyn gave me another of those knowing smiles. "I'm glad you like it," she said softly. "I really hope you feel at home here. It's a place where the world outside can't touch you." We continued wandering through the house until we reached the back door, which opened into a garden so lush it seemed to pulse with life. I had seen gardens before, but nothing like this. The flowers were so vivid they seemed almost unnatural. Brilliant violets and deep crimson roses, their petals glistening as if coated with dew, even though the air felt dry. The herbs were equally mesmerizing, rows of mint and thyme, but also odd plants I didn't recognize, their leaves shimmering with iridescent hues that changed as the light shifted. "Is this all real?" I asked, stepping closer to a cluster of flowers that seemed to glow faintly in the dimming light. "Real enough," Aunt Evelyn replied with a small, cryptic smile. "These are the plants I work with. the ones that help others. They're a part of this land, and they have a way of growing with the people who tend them. I couldn't stop staring at the garden, a sense of awe filling me, but there was something about it that felt too perfect. It was impossible to say, but it felt as though the land itself had been cultivated with some purpose far beyond simple gardening. I wasn't sure if it was the garden's magic or the strange pull Aunt Evelyn seemed to have on me. But in that moment, everything else felt far away. The questions I had, the doubts swirling in my mind, seemed to fade into the background, replaced by a dizzying, inexplicable sense of calm. But deep down, a small voice in my mind whispered, "This isn't normal. None of this is normal." Over the next few days, I settled into a strange routine. Aunt Evelyn guided me through the preparation of various tinctures, salves, and potions. She was patient, teaching me to mix ingredients in a way that felt almost intuitive, as though I were following an ancient rhythm rather than learning a craft. The house, with its endless shelves of jars and bottles, became my new world. But the deeper I delved into the work, the more questions piled up. Questions I couldn't seem to ask without meeting her cryptic, serene smile. "Is there any particular reason why these?" I asked one morning, holding up a jar of something green and sticky. "Every herb has its purpose," Aunt Evelyn replied, her voice gentle, her hands moving deftly as she worked on another concoction. "But not all purposes are obvious." I was used to studying, used to dissecting everything with a logical, academic approach. But here, logic seemed to bend and twist in ways that made my skin itch. There was something strange about it all. I couldn't quite put my finger on it. And then there were the clients. Every morning, without fail, they arrived one by one like clockwork. The first time I saw them, I thought I was imagining things, but each day after, they grew harder to ignore. The first was a woman, tall and unnervingly perfect, with silken golden hair that shimmered in the sunlight, her eyes the color of deep emeralds. But it was her fingers, long, delicate, and translucent, that made me pause. They were almost like glass, catching the light in strange, unsettling ways. She didn't speak a word as she handed Aunt Evelyn a small, intricately carved wooden box. The air around her shimmered like heat rising off pavement, and I couldn't look away even as she glanced at me with a cold, impersonal gaze. Next came a man, a stranger whose features were so symmetrical, so unreal they made my stomach turn. His skin was almost too smooth, too flawless, and his eyes were deep pools of silver staring right through me. He didn't smile. He didn't greet me either, but instead handed over a bundle of fresh leaves wrapped in brown paper. He didn't ask for anything, just left. As the days passed, more appeared. A woman with skin like bark, her eyes hollow like the depths of a forest. A young man whose legs seemed to bend at impossible angles as he moved, the sharp sound of snapping joints echoing in the still air. And the one I feared most, a figure cloaked in shadow whose face I never saw but whose presence seemed to twist the very air around us. My questions about our strange clientele were never answered. I asked Aunt Evelyn countless times about the purpose of the concoctions we made, about why certain clients received particular mixtures, but she only ever told me who they were for. Never what they were for. It was as if the what didn't matter, only the who. She would smile, as always, and say, "You'll understand when the time comes," but that time never seemed to arrive. Instead, I was left to continue the work, the meaning behind it all just out of reach, like a shadow at the edge of my vision. But no one ever spoke to me directly, except for the handsome young man who came on the fourth day. He was striking in every way, with dark, tousled hair and eyes that seemed to flicker between amber and gold. His smile was disarming, too charming, as though he knew how to bend you to his will with just a glance. He approached the counter with a confidence that made my heart race. "Good morning," he said, his voice smooth and low like a melody. "I was wondering if you might be able to help me. I've heard you've taken over for your aunt. Such a lovely lady. But surely you know how to make things interesting around here." He lingered near the counter, his gaze never leaving mine. "I don't suppose you'd invite me in for a cup of tea. Perhaps we could talk." I swallowed, my mind racing with the rules Aunt Evelyn had drilled into me. No giving away your real name. No inviting anyone inside. No accepting gifts. No bargains, no pleasantries. Initially, they had seemed odd, even obnoxious. But now, standing behind the shop counter, staring at the figure before me, they suddenly felt essential. I forced a smile and stepped back, keeping the counter between us. "I'm afraid I can't offer you tea, but if you need something, I can help you find it." The young man raised an eyebrow, his smile curling into something almost predatory. "No tea? No invitation?" He chuckled softly, but there was something off about the sound, like it was too rehearsed. "A shame. You have such a lovely place. Maybe I'll find a way to make you change your mind." I could feel the weight of his gaze on me as I turned to fetch a bottle. My hands were clammy, my pulse racing. What was it about him? He didn't look dangerous, not in the way I'd been warned to expect. But there was something deeply unsettling in the way he watched me, like he could see straight through me. The days blurred into one another. The strange clients came and went, always as eerie and enigmatic. Each morning, as the sun crept lazily over the horizon, they would appear one after another like clockwork. The woman with the glassy fingers, the man whose movements creaked like dry wood, the figure cloaked in shadow. Always they came for their medicines, always they said nothing, merely leaving behind their odd, wordless exchanges. I was learning the craft quickly, though it felt like the deeper I went, the more I became a part of the strange world around me. Each concoction I made, every herb I measured out, felt more like a ritual than a recipe. Aunt Evelyn had taught me the steps without explaining their significance, why certain plants went with others, why they were mixed in such precise ways, but I didn't question it. There was something almost hypnotic about the way she guided me through the motions. The quiet of the house, the hum of the garden, it all melded together until the days felt endless. When was I meant to leave? It was on one of those quiet mornings that I first noticed her absence. I woke, as usual, to the sound of the birds outside, the soft rustle of leaves in the garden. But when I stepped into the kitchen, the house was empty. The familiar scent of herbs and lavender was absent. There was no clinking of jars, no rustle of Aunt Evelyn's skirts. The house felt hollow, like a shell without its heartbeat. I wandered through the rooms, calling her name softly at first, then louder when I didn't hear an answer. "Aunt Evelyn?" I called, my voice strange in the silence. "Where are you?" There was no reply, no echo of her footsteps on the stairs, no flicker of her shadow moving across the walls. Suddenly, the familiar chime of the bell above the door rang out, and for a brief moment I felt a wave of relief. My head snapped around in response, but the comfort was fleeting. I felt him before I even saw him. The young man with his dark, tousled hair and that smile that never quite reached his eyes stepped inside, his gaze fixed on me with a predatory calm. This time he didn't approach the counter. Instead, he leaned casually against the door frame, his eyes gleaming with an almost playful mischief. "Back again, I see," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, my thoughts locked tight around the rules Aunt Evelyn had left me with. He tilted his head slightly, a slow smile curling at the corners of his mouth. "You're learning quickly, I see," he said, his voice smooth like honey mixed with something darker. "But you still seem so tense." His eyes never leaving mine. "Come now, there's no need to be so formal." I think you know I'm not like the others. I stiffened. He was trying to trick me again. I refused to meet his gaze directly, focusing instead on the tinctures behind the counter, hoping to maintain some distance between us. Is there something I can help you with? I asked, voice tight. His smile widened, but there was no warmth in it. I felt my pulse quicken, the air around us thick with his presence. You know, I could make things easier for you, he said softly. It doesn't have to be so lonely here. You don't have to follow all these silly little rules. Invite me in. Let me show you what I can offer. I took a deep breath, remembering the rules. I couldn't give my name. I couldn't invite him in. I couldn't break any of them. I held my ground. No, I said, my voice firmer now, though I could feel the hesitation in my chest. He sighed, pushing himself off the door frame with exaggerated slowness, his eyes flickering with amusement. Pity. You'd be much happier without them. He stepped back, giving me one last lingering look. But I guess we've got a lot of time, haven't we? His voice was low, almost teasing, as if he were savoring the thought of me being trapped here with him. With a final lingering glance, he turned and left, the door closing softly behind him, leaving me standing there, shaken. The silence that followed was louder than any words he could have spoken. Panic began to creep into my chest. I rushed to the back door to the garden, but it was the same. No sign of my aunt, just the rows of plants swaying in the wind, the stillness of the air thick with something I couldn't place. A sense of unease gnawed at me. Had she gone somewhere? But I couldn't remember her telling me anything about leaving. She had never mentioned a trip, never said a word about disappearing. Suddenly I realized I had no way of reaching her. Why are there no phones here? When was the last time I spoke to anyone? And where are all the townspeople except for my aunt's odd customers? The silence felt heavy, oppressive. I tried to steady my breathing, my thoughts racing. Maybe I missed something, I muttered to myself, pacing. I glanced in the kitchen, trying to find some clue, some sign that she had just stepped out for a moment. That's when I noticed it, the book. The one she had left by the counter the night before, its cover worn and frayed, its presence unremarkable at first. I hadn't even thought to open it before, but now it seemed to call to me. I reached for it, my fingers trembling as I flipped it open. The pages were old, the ink faded but still legible. The book was filled with strange symbols, drawings of herbs I had never seen before, and instructions for concoctions I didn't understand. But it was the last page that caught my eye. Written in bold, sweeping script, it read, "The pharmacy is yours now. You are its keeper. You will serve those who come, and you will keep to the rules. Do not stray from them. The garden will provide you with everything you need. The house is a place where the world outside can't touch you." My stomach dropped. The house, the garden, the entire world around me felt suffocating. It wasn't just her house anymore. It was mine, and there was no way out. I grabbed my coat and rushed outside, my eyes scanning the distant horizon. But there was nothing. No sign of her anywhere. I stood there for what felt like hours, waiting, hoping that she would come back, that this was all some strange mistake. I sank to my knees, the weight of the book pressing into my palms. I'm trapped here, I thought, my breath shallow, my heart racing. The next morning, as the first light of dawn filtered through the windows, I prepared for another day, my mind tangled in the same thoughts. The pharmacy was mine now, and I was meant to tend to it. I was meant to follow the rules. Story 4 ends here, and now we enter the fog of Story 5. If you see a man drowning in Lake Wilcox, don't help him. I know, it sounds awful, but I have to warn you anyway. It's not worth the risk, even if the person drowning might not be him. You'll never see his face through the splashes, so don't think it's a simple matter of recognition. They say he only appears at night, but I've heard a story or two from the daylight hours over the years. It's never safe to rescue someone. The locals all know this, but I didn't. Not until it was far too late. It was summer of 2006. I was 19 back then, just a dumbass kid shouldering a dangerous feeling of invincibility. Enough so that I had become a volunteer firefighter straight out of high school. Most of my friends went off to college, so the semester months of late 2005 had been quite lonely. I saw my best friend Carson over winter break, and she must have picked up on my low mood. "I'll tell you what, Joey," she had said. "Next summer I'll grab Trish and Cole and we'll all go on a camping trip." At the time, the very idea caused my heart to grow wings and soar to cloud 9. I wish I could forget that feeling. Maybe the fall wouldn't hurt as much from a lesser height. Trish and Cole had been our friends since 6th grade. Carson and I took bets on how long it would take those two to get together, but we both lost. They were smart enough to stay just friends until they were accepted to the same college. While I had known Carson since kindergarten, they were still very dear friends of mine all the same. The four of us had gone camping with Cole's parents in the summer of 1999. The group unanimously considered the trip to be our finest hour. Hell, I still have a picture of us from that trip on my desk at home. You can clearly see Cole looking at Trish, and we gave him shit about it for years. Some days I even turn it around to face me as I write. As the summer approached, our excitement grew. We'd already bought the tents, some fishing gear, and a cooler for our illicit beverages. We borrowed the rest from Cole's family. We planned most of the details out, and by we, I mean Trish, as she didn't appreciate spontaneity like the rest of us did, and I had the printed directions to Lake Wilcox in hand when Carson rolled up in her 1992 Tahoe. I quickly threw my gear and backpack in the rear before jumping into the passenger seat. The moment I sat down, Carson leaned over and gave me a hug. "Aye, there he is," came Cole's voice from the back seat as he clapped a massive hand on my shoulder. "It's so good to see you," beamed Trish as she held Cole's other hand. "How have you been?" "Can't complain," I replied. "I had my first house fire last week. Everyone made it out before we even got there. And yes, they had their cat with them. I've never seen a cat looking so pissed off." "Jesus, Joey," said Cole, shaking his head. "You sound way too excited when you talk about burning buildings." Carson glanced over, agreement clear in her eyes. "Yeah, I know," I said as I rubbed the back of my neck. "Just promise us you won't be stupid and rush in," Trish added. "I want this trip to be an annual thing, and it won't be the same without your dumb ass." I smiled. "I promise." "So," Carson interrupted, "you gonna tell me which way we're going, First Officer Dipshit?" The rest of the 4-hour drive went much the same way. It gave us plenty of time to catch up with one another, and Cole took full advantage of the cooler within arm's reach. Trish frowned disapprovingly as he stumbled while exiting Carson's Tahoe. The rest of us followed suit, and together we walked across the gravel lot towards the tree line. I'll give it to Trish. She picked one hell of a spot. The trees were tall, yet not so dense as to block too much sunlight or hinder hiking. A perfect combination of shade and the space to toss a frisbee. I could already see several perfect locations to set up our tents. And then there was Lake Wilcox itself. The waters reached the shore no more than 50 feet from where we would ultimately set up camp. An old dock stood nearby, going out about 20 feet into the lake. The surface was calm, but moved enough to soothe any worries of still water. "Oh, hell yeah," Cole cheered. "This is gonna be so awesome. Babe, you're incredible." Trish huffed, but couldn't quite hide her smile. "Yeah, Trish, this looks perfect," Carson added. "How did you find this place?" "Google Earth," Trish replied with pride. It looked like a great place to camp. The nearest town is only 2 miles away in case we end up needing anything, she said, glancing at the notoriously forgetful Cole. Plus, I couldn't find anything online about people camping here, so I figured we'd probably have the place to ourselves. Well, it looks like you were right, I chimed in. I don't see any campsites. Hell, it looks like nobody's been here in a while. Well, let's hurry up and get our tents up so we can start drinking, said Cole, effortlessly knocking the smile clear off Trish's face. Once we were set up, the fun really began. The drinks were flowing, the fish were biting, and Cole had the time of his life as we tossed a football back and forth. He blew out his knee during his senior season, and I could tell how much he enjoyed catching passes again. Carson and Trish were arranging small rocks to build a makeshift fire pit. As Carson straightened the last rock to her liking, she stood up and took off her shirt to reveal the bikini top she had on beneath. Before I could react, the rest of her outerwear was in her tent and she was racing towards the dock. "Cannonball!" she shouted as she entered the water with a massive splash. We all laughed and started stripping down to our swimsuits and leapt in one by one. The water felt incredible against my skin as I broke the surface. Carson beamed at me. "Come on, Joey. Let's swim out a bit." Look, I'm not a perfect man. Although I would have never risked her friendship, I did have a thing for Carson back then. It didn't take much for her to convince me to do something. Soon the depth was beyond where our toes could touch, and Carson challenged me to a race by swimming at full speed the moment I looked back to see our other friends. Her laughter was cut short when her feet touched the bottom again, about 100 yards from the shore. "Hey, Joey, come check this out," she said as she stood up. Sure enough, my feet soon touched the bottom as well. At my full height, the water barely reached my waist. "It must be a sandbar," she said. "This is pretty cool." "Yeah, you're right. Think we should call Trish and Cole out here?" Carson looked back towards the shore. The couple were having a blast splashing each other back in the shallows as if we weren't even here. "Nah," she said as she lowered her body back into the shallow water. "It's like our own private island." She paused. "Unless you've got a problem with being stranded on an island with me?" Why would I? Yes, readers. I couldn't read a flashing neon sign. Anyway, we stayed right there for around half an hour, only swimming back as the sun began to slide below the horizon. Soon the four of us were comfortably surrounding a small campfire. "Hey, can I talk to you for a second?" Cole asked me quietly. "Yeah, of course," I said as I set my beer down. Cole beckoned me over and I joined him a short distance away. "All right, what's up, man?" Cole rubbed the back of his head sheepishly. "My dumb ass left the protection at home." "I mean, I've got a gun in my bag," I replied. "No, dude, the other protection." "Oh, well, good job, buddy. If you're asking me for one, I don't have any." "Damn. I was hoping you finally had the balls to make a move on Carson." "Hurtful." "Anyway," said Cole, "do you think Carson would let me borrow her Tahoe so I can get some in town?" "Why are you asking me? Ask her. And are you even sober?" "Yeah, I'm good," he assured me. "I noticed my fuck up when I put my stuff in our tent, so I haven't had a drink since we got here." "Can you ask her?" "I don't want Trish to know." I rolled my eyes. "Whatever, man. I'll see what I can do." Carson was hesitant, but Cole really had sobered up in the hours we had been here, so she agreed and gave him directions to the nearby town. Cole fed Trish a story of wanting to grab some more snacks, and he left. By this point, Carson and I were quite drunk and returned to our tents once Trish assured us that she would be all right waiting for Cole. I didn't wake up until I heard Carson scream, "Trish! Oh my God, Joe, get out here now!" I never moved so fast in my life. I was out of my tent like a shot and immediately saw Carson kneeling at the water's edge. My heart sank as I sprinted towards her. But she wasn't alone. Though only lit by moonlight, I could still see that she was dragging Trish ashore, and Trish was unresponsive. My training kicked in, and I quickly rolled Trish onto her back to clear her airway. I couldn't feel a pulse, so I began CPR. Water flowed from her open mouth with the first compression. As soon as the water stopped, I began mouth to mouth, but Carson stopped me. "I'll do that, you focus on her heart." I pushed down on her chest with everything I had. The sickening crunch of my friend's ribs breaking under my hands is a feeling that will never leave me. But it was no use. As soon as I had a proper look at her face, I knew Trish was gone. Her skin had gone pale with the telltale blue tint of asphyxiation. Her open, unfocused eyes were the final sign that my efforts were in vain. Slowly, I stopped my compressions, and Carson buried her face in my shoulder and began to cry. I hadn't even noticed my own tears until that moment. I reached down and closed her eyes. "Carson, what happened?" I stepped out to pee, and I saw her floating in the water," she responded between soft sobs. She was face down. I looked down at the body of our friend. She was still wearing her gym shorts and tank top, as if she hadn't planned on entering the water. I steadied myself as best I could. "We need to call the police," I said gently. Carson nodded and rubbed her eyes before standing up and walking back towards her tent to grab her phone. Something else was bothering me, though. Trish had been a member of our school's swimming team. For her to drown like this made no sense. But there was one other thing. To this day, Carson doesn't know what I saw in the water as we pulled Trish out. Eyes glazed over as if dead, until they blinked. But they immediately vanished after that. At the time, I assumed it had been a large catfish or something. "I have no signal," came Carson's voice from behind me. "Shit, I'll go try." Sure enough, my phone also had no service. Same with Trish's. "And Cole has the truck," I thought aloud as the full helplessness of the situation hit me. "Cole," whispered Carson. "Oh God, how are we going to tell him?" "I'll tell him," I said. "I've had to do it before." What Carson didn't know was the day after the house fire my department had put out, I'd responded to a car accident. I had to tell the driver that his brother in the passenger seat was gone. "Help me!" The voice came with a flurry of frantic splashing in the lake behind me. I whipped around to see a man foundering a few hundred feet from the shore. Instinct once again took over, and I tossed my phone aside. But before I could jump into the water, I felt a hand clamp down on my shoulder. "Wait," came Carson's voice from behind me. "Let go," I said, trying to shrug her hand off of me, but she gripped tighter. "Joseph, something's not right." We had been friends for 15 years at that time, and not once had she called me that. Not just that, there was a fear in her voice I had never heard before. It was enough to stop me in my tracks. I looked back, and Carson was staring out at the drowning man. "Look where he is." I turned back towards the lake and froze. The turbulent water was directly over the sandbar. The man was splashing in less than 3 feet of water. My body went cold. My instincts screamed as if I had come face to face with a mountain lion. We watched the lake in silence for what felt like an eternity as the man continued to call for help, until he stopped. The lake instantly fell silent, along with any wildlife in the area. It was as if the woods themselves held their breath, and a pale face began emerging from the water where the man had been. It broke the surface, and it just kept rising. It finally came to a stop around 6 feet above the water, and that was when I noticed the body of a man beneath it. He stood motionless on the surface. As he stared at us, another detail emerged. His neck was broken. The dead eyes staring back at us were nearly vertical. The man let out a horrific screech and sprinted across the water straight towards us. Far, far faster than any man ever could, with his head flopping against his shoulder the entire way. His movements weren't natural, almost like a section of film with too many cuts and sloppy editing. Before we could even react to what was happening, he came to an instant halt at the same point the water did, less than 4 feet from Carson. The man glanced at the ground before him and glared at us with utter malice clear in his broken face. "What's going on? Who the fuck is that?" came Cole's voice from somewhere behind us. The man's head snapped upright instantly. A terrifying smile full of rotten, broken teeth crept across his features, before taking a step backward into the water. Cole must have noticed Trish's body as he let out a cry and rushed to her side, hopelessly shaking his dead fiancée. "What did you do to her?" he roared, tears forming in his eyes as he turned to face the smiling man, who responded by taking another step back into the lake and holding his grin. "Cole, don't!" Carson screamed, but it was too late. Cole charged his partner's killer. "You son of a bitch, I'll kill yo!" was all he got out before being pulled underwater. I dove in after him without a second thought. He was our friend. He would have done the same for us. I swam after the bubble trail as fast as I could, but I only made it 50 feet before something tightened around my neck and snapped my head backward down into the pitch-black water. I felt a thud below me as if something heavy had impacted the lake floor. The shimmering moonlight was barely visible from the surface about 20 feet above me. My hands clawed at the invisible rope around my neck as my lungs began to burn. My vision started to blur. My movement slowed, though I refused to give up as a shadow blocked the dim light from above. Carson. She'd found me. I hadn't noticed her following me into the water after Cole. She grabbed my arm and pulled against the invisible rope as it fought to take my life. She must have noticed my struggle against my own throat, and she reached for the force holding me under, and it vanished. I was free. Carson dragged me to the surface just before the inevitable reflex to breathe could draw water into my lungs. Seconds after we surfaced, a muffled screech emitted from the bubbling waters below. It sounded pissed. "Swim!" she shouted. Leading up to this moment, I wasn't a particularly fast swimmer. However, survival instincts easily doubled my normal pace as we frantically swam for the bank. But we weren't the only ones. A stream of bubbles was streaking towards us from behind. I fucking felt the man swim past me just before Carson went under. Without a second thought, I pushed myself back underwater after her, but whatever this thing was put banshees to shame. A scream reverberated through the water with enough force to permanently damage my hearing. But I could see Carson surfacing again. We ran the moment our feet touched the bottom and scrambled ashore. I looked over my shoulder, and man, do I regret it. The man was once again standing on the surface of less than an inch of water behind us. His head was once again hanging by his shoulder, but he reached up, grabbed his hair, and used it to hold his head upright as he glared at us. The waters around him grew turbulent as his milky, dead eyes narrowed in pure hatred. Then he vanished. The water became still. The world was instantly as it should be. Well, almost. Cole never resurfaced. Everything after that was a blur. The local sheriff and his men recovered Trish's body from the shore where we left her. There were funerals, furious, grieving relatives, and blackout drinking on my part. But even through the haze, I noticed one thing. The deputies were very careful to avoid touching the water as they worked. They knew that was 19 years ago. Despite my best efforts to ruin things by becoming an alcoholic, Carson married me anyway once I sobered up for good. We spent years researching the history of the area, and eventually we found a name: Gabriel Barnes. An alleged child killer in the 1830s, Barnes disappeared from existence around the same time Sheriff Wilcox's son did. After what we went through, I'd guess Wilcox tied a noose to an anchor or a rock around Barnes' neck and threw him into the lake that would soon carry his name. As for how we survived that night when our friends didn't, we eventually realized that the only difference between us and them was the solid iron bracelet Carson wore on her left wrist that day. There's one more thing I haven't mentioned. At the bottom of that lake, I saw something sticking out of the mud, the end of a human femur. As I write this, my wife is loading our scuba gear into our truck. We know where the bastard is. More importantly, we know how to hurt him. We're gonna burn those fucking bones and put the son of a bitch down. But I'm leaving this as a warning in case we don't come back. If you see someone foundering in Lake Wilcox, let them drown. Story 5 ends here now. Settle in for story 6. And 3 insist he's still there. It's a decades-old joke, cliché boomer humor. Probably been told almost as long as there have been telephones to call. It basically goes like this. A woman doesn't come home one night. The next day, she explains to her husband that she slept over at a friend's house. The husband calls his wife's 5 best friends. None of them know anything about it. A man doesn't come home one night. The next day, he tells his wife that he slept over at a friend's house. The wife calls her husband's 5 best friends. All of them say he had slept over, and 3 claim that he was still there. Of course, the number of friends varies, etc., but it's a pretty specific joke, so it has fewer forms than most. It's just there to go, ha-ha. Women's friends are catty and insincere, while boys are ride or die for the guy who said nice shirt one time at a Wendy's. Cliché stereotype stuff. Now, if the joke happened to you, unlike some weirder ones, you wouldn't bat an eye. Either your friends suck or they're awesome, depending on which side of the joke you're playing. But, well, you'll understand in a moment, I guess. My marriage has been pretty smooth. Me and my husband haven't been together long. We only got our first apartment together a year ago. We're still pretty young, so we aren't always responsible. It happened around the holiday season, not right around Christmas or anything, just in the general time. Maybe it was around the 3rd. The old gang went bar hopping because it was the anniversary of when someone did something. I was friends with some of them too, but I could never figure that one out. I don't even think it happened on the same date every time. Anyway, I came home one night and he didn't. The next morning, Tom, my husband, comes in trying to look like he isn't a hungover train wreck run through a washing machine and miserably failing. "Oh, well, hello." I greeted him with icy cordiality. I was brewing my morning coffee. It was a weekend, so I didn't need to head anywhere right away. I'm sure that had played into his decision in the first place. Sorry. He abashedly scratched the back of his head. Got a little too wild last night. And just where did you get a little too wild yesterday to come in today? I certainly think I had the right to be asking that. It wasn't any sort of party he had planned or had told me about, at least, that justified staying the night. Had it been, I certainly would have been more involved. Sorry, really, I got a little more wasted than I thought. Crashed at a friend's place. He rushed over to pour his own coffee, gulping it black as fast as he could to fight his obvious hangover. And what friend was this? I questioned. I was being hard on him, but it certainly wasn't unjustified considering what he just pulled. I think anyone would have expected a call at least. His brows furrowed in obvious confusion. I was a little relieved not to see him go right to guilty dodging, but annoyed that he struggled to recall even that basic fact. God, was it Jay? Don? It feels like I was at all of them. I think that having seen that joke recently influenced my decision by putting the idea in my head. Normally, I wouldn't bother interrogating his friends. Even if I were truly pissed, I would come up with a better way to press the issue than that. That time, though, I decided to go with the first idea that popped into my head. It wouldn't reveal anything useful, but it would make him squirm a little as payback for his terrible judgment. Okay, I'll call them. I had barely thought it before I said it out loud. Huh? He was confused. Of course, he was also still nursing a horrible hangover and next to zero sleep, so obviously that was to be expected. I'll call them. See where you stayed last night. The way I said it firmly communicated this wasn't optional. Okay, cool. He mumbled, already nursing his third coffee. Let's see. You mentioned Jay, Don, Tony, Jin, and Bill. I thought through each good friend I knew would have been there. I dialed Jay. It took a second attempt. No big surprise, he would have been just as hungover. Finally, he answered. Jay? Huh? An indistinct grumble came through the line. Did Tom stay the night with you? I asked, trying not to sound accusatory. Yeah? He didn't message you? Did he make it home? I think I heard him leave like an hour ago. He paused. Wait, what time is it? Don't hold me to that guess. His voice was a slurred mess of exhaustion and confusion. It's all right, Jay. I think he just arrived. I hung up. Clearly he needed more time to sleep it off. So that's that. It was Jay. Tom was clearly happy to end this quickly. You don't remember it being Jay's apartment you stumbled out of just an hour ago? I questioned. I don't think I can remember 10 minutes before I came through that door, he admitted. I was glad he was honest instead of going straight to insisting it was totally Jay, and that he remembered everything now. I want to test something. I was honest too. Don? I dialed the next number. And Kay. I heard a misshapen snort. Yeah, Ellie. Did Tom crash with you? Yeah, just left 20 minutes ago. Should be home soon. Don't kick his ass too hard. He sounded a little better off than Jay, despite his undignified opening. You don't need to lie for me, dog. Tom spoke up, sounding terribly embarrassed by the whole thing. The fuck? Don sounded confused. You're home already. I heard a confused chuckle from the other side. I swear to God, T, if you weren't here, I don't know who the fuck was. I could almost feel the defensive shrug through the line. He's been home over 5 minutes already. No way he could have gotten here that fast. I wasn't going to start a fight with Don, but I had to point out the reality. I know, Don admitted. I must have lost track of time. He seemed uncertain. We'll figure it out. I made sure not to sound too harsh. He was legitimately confused seeming, even if I was sure that it was too much alcohol and a misguided intent to be a good friend. Bye? I hung up. That was so messed up, Tom chuckled. You know what they say about guy friends. I wasn't even angry at Don. Everyone will say you were there, and two will insist you still are. Yeah, I know, he just seemed confused. Must have been one of the other guys. Tom's face, slowly regaining its life and color, betrayed confusion of his own. I guess I'll find out. I started dialing the next number. Wait, you're still doing this? He questioned. Let me enjoy this spectacle and maybe I'll forget to be mad at you. I pointed out the obvious. That made him quiet. Hey, Jin. I eagerly greeted the next on my list. Ugh, yeah? He vaguely tried to cover up his obvious hangover. Did Tom crash with you yesterday? I asked the same question. Did he? He's still here. I had to stifle a laugh. Tom looked mortified. I held up a hand to stop him from speaking up and ruining the fun. Could you put him on? I wondered just how he would get out of this. Sure. I looked at Tom in befuddlement. He looked equally lost. Just what was Jin going to do? He couldn't fake my husband's voice if his life depended on it. Hey, man, get up! I faintly heard him talking over the phone. He was clearly holding it away from his face. Yeah? My blood ran cold. That sounded exactly like Tom. Your wife's calling, bro. I told you you should move your ass. You're screwed, man. I could hear the phone get chucked onto a bed and someone fumble to pick it up. Hey, Ellie. Tom's face contorted in horror at a much clearer sound of what was unmistakably his own voice coming from over the phone. It was groggy and slurred, but absolutely his own. "What is this?" My words were of pure shock. "I'm sorry, I got way too smashed. I conked out right here with gin. I should have had someone drive me home, and I definitely should have messaged you. Yes, you should have." For a moment, I wasn't sure if I should probe for more, but I was just too terrified by what I was hearing. I hung up the call. What the fuck was that? What in the living hell was that? I was freaking out. I could feel myself hyperventilating. It's gotta be a prank. My husband was clearly barely keeping it together any better than I was. "Let's not panic. You know AI these days. They must have just heard the same joke you did and are doing a bit." I wasn't convinced. He obviously wasn't either. It wasn't impossible that could be the explanation, but it seemed very, very improbable. What was the explanation then? Without an answer to that, I knew what I had to do. "Tony?" I called the next friend. "Hey, Tony?" "Ugh, yeah. Sorry, cleaning up over here." He sounded markedly better than the others. "That's all right, I just wanted to check. Did Tom stay at your place?" "Tom, did you really not call Ellie?" Tony shouted away from the phone, annoyance clear in his voice. "I lost my phone, man, sorry." My husband, yet another one, called back. "Geez, yeah, he's right here. I'll send him home when he's done cleaning my sink out. You can guess why." Okay, thank you. I'll call back later." I stumbled through, hanging up. Something felt so deeply, terribly wrong. My hands were sweating. They really prepared these perfect responses after a night of getting stone cold smashed at bars. No way. This wasn't a joke, and it wasn't okay. The world was somehow wrong, terribly wrong. I misdialed Bill 3 times before getting through. Tom just started pacing the room, racking his brain for what could be happening, or trying to remember. I was too focused on the last call to ask, "Bill?" I couldn't hide the desperation in my voice. "Yeah, you all right?" He sounded concerned at my panic. Shit, did Tom not tell you he stayed over? Everyone's okay. He guessed at the source of my panic. Is he still there? I didn't know which I wanted. If he said no, I would have no more answers. If he said yes, I didn't know if I could keep it together hearing another impossible husband. "Yeah, hey, time's up, buddy." I could hear the phone being passed off. "Hey, El, sorry, I lost my phone. I crashed safely here the whole night. I know I should have had Bill text. I guess I drank too much." "You can't be. I'm here. I came home. I'm right here." Tom finally snapped. There was a long, tense pause. "That can't be, man. We crashed right here at Bill's the whole night." The Tom on the other side, quietly insisted. "Who are you? What are you?" I was borderline sobbing as I demanded answers. "It's me, Ellie. It's Tom. Who is over there with you?" I could sense a quiet desperation in the voice over the phone. I hung up. I had to. I couldn't answer it after all. "What is happening? What happened to you?" I broke down sobbing at last. Nothing made sense, least of all the equally broken-looking man across the table from me. "I don't know," he muttered, barely able to speak himself. "I don't know. I can't remember anything. I know we went out. I can't remember anything." He kept repeating it, trying to force himself to remember. He never did. We tracked his phone to a bar restroom across town. None of the other Toms came home.